And just enjoy the company of the great man for the first half an hour or so. Dan, good morning to you. Welcome to Luck on Sunday.
Thanks for having me again.
Not at all. So much to talk about, as I say, later in the programme. But really, I just wanted to ease our way into this week by sort of taking stock, really, of you and your career and where it's at and how happy you are with nearly 800 winners in a very short space of time and 200 last year and the Skelton juggernaut rolling along. How are you feeling about life?
Pretty positive, really, as you would probably expect. And I'm in a very lucky position. Obviously, you're as lucky as you often work hard, but there isn't really any reason why we've sort of got luckier than others from the start of our careers. We set out to make it happen, and it's been remarkable how it has kind of gone how we hoped it would. And sometimes you're better off born a little bit lucky, and I sometimes feel like that, if I'm honest with you. 9.5 years with Paul, with all those great horses, and my dad achieving what he'd achieved, and we got to ride that roller coaster for a long while as well. It's been I've had a remarkable life, and I know I'm only a young fella in relative terms, but I'm very grateful to everyone who give us the chance to do it, really, and hopefully a good percentage of those think we rewarded them. You are obviously still infuriatingly young, as I was ascertaining a few moments ago. You are only 34. You have packed a hell of a lot into 3.5 decades. Tell me a little bit about growing up as the son of Nick Skelton. It was obviously your dad's your dad, and your parents, and that's it. First and foremost, he was the one who told us off, and two young lads around the place. It's not easy to be a father when you've got two spirited young fellas who love motorbikes and riding ponies and sport and everything else. And he had the challenges of every father, just like I'm having now with my daughter. But it's great, and I know he enjoyed us being around when we were growing up, and we just saw him as dad. We didn't see him as this global sporting icon. Because don't forget, when I was born in the 80s, that was when show jumping was a mainstream BBC sport. I'd like to think it still is. But yeah, well, I quite agree. I mean, it's obviously revolutionised itself, the sport. But those were the facts then, and there was a lot of things you had to deal with because people half expected you to be a great rider because he was, and I knew I was never going to live up to that expectation. Because I just wasn't good enough. Harry was a very good rider, despite what you saw at Olympia this year.
Did you ride when you were?
I did.
Young?
Yeah, a lot. I did a lot. Yeah, but I wasn't. I can say this hand on heart. A lot of people say they got unlucky, didn't get the breaks and everything else. I just wasn't good enough. I was determined, very determined. I used to win quite a lot, but I wasn't skillful enough to produce horses to the next level and get on and. That's the hardest thing in that sport, and that's why my dad's been so good. He's taken those horses like Top Gun, Arco, and Big Star, obviously, from real young horses and made them into global stars. And growing up, it was a great grounding around horses and a man who was under a lot of spotlight, a lot of pressure, and he absorbed it. It was an era perhaps where you could be a little more insular. There wasn't the social medias, and one thing Dad will admit, he isn't great with the press and the media and things like that. And I think I've learnt a lot from Paul on that. I mean, that's a fact. But growing up, it was just fantastic.
Did you travel a lot together? Because the life of a show jumper is pretty itinerant these days.
Yeah, all over the place, and saw a lot of different cultures, a lot of different ways of doing things. In England, the show jumpers, they had sort of maybe 6 or 8 horses, and that was considered to be a lot. And then you had the yards on the continent, like Paul Schockermoller's, where there was hundreds, if not thousands. And I got to see that before it became a thing. He was like the Martin Pipe, Paul Schockermoller of the jumping world, and people followed his lead, and I got to see and sort of experience these different types of equine management theories, if you like, and I draw upon all of them in everyday life, really, always thinking about how to improve your system and horses and your staff, and it's an ever-evolving business.
Because there was an orthodoxy that always said that you couldn't train more than 100 horses, say. You couldn't have them and do the job well. So you were looking at systems abroad where people were managing, as you say, thousands of horses at a time and doing it successfully.
Exactly. And Dad, during his early years, obviously was working for Edgar's, and they were Team Everest at the time. It was the first commercial sponsorship in show jumping, I think.
This is Ted Edgar.
Ted Edgar, yeah.
Liz Edgar.
And they had about 4 or 5 riders there, and those riders, I think 3 or 4 of them went on to get top international honours, be it Europeans, World or Olympic medals. And if you've got people of that quality on your team, anything is possible. Any number is possible, and that's how I relate to it. I've got obviously my brother and his wife Bridget. I've got Tom Messenger. You've got people that you don't see all the time. Nick Pearce, who we're going to talk about later, who trains Don Poley, point-to-pointing. They're all capable in their own right. Sam Davis-Thomas, who's another one of my assistants, had tons of winners point-to-pointing. These are intelligent managers who, with a different set of cards, would be very good trainers in their own right. And I can rely on them to do the right thing every day. And if you've got the people in place to maintain the system that works, then any number's possible.
Was it always going to be racing for you?
Once I went to ditch it and committed to that, definitely. As long as people wanted me, as long as horses came our way, then it was always going to be that.
But why did you end up at Paul Nicholls in the first place?
It's a funny story, actually, because I had a point-to-pointer. My first point-to-pointer was a horse called Mick the Cutaway. I think was Ruby's first winner under rules, actually. And I had him as an older horse, and I won with him. And he actually went to Heather Dalton's. I bought him from Heather Dalton's, and I went away on holiday just before he had his first run, and about a fortnight, 3 weeks before he had his first run. And Heather had him back, and Heather got him fit. And I thought I'd got him fit, but looking back on it, I know that I didn't. And actually, he won first time and then deteriorated because I didn't keep him fit enough. And it was a bit of a learning curve. I expected things to get better, not deteriorate. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? This isn't right. John Hales then sent me a point-to-pointer because he owned Arco at the time with Dad, and said, if we're going to do this, we better learn how to do it properly. So Paul had his owner's day, and John Hales said, I'll give you a lift down to Ditchit when we go down for owner's day, and then spend a fortnight down there or something, and you might learn something. And off we went.
And you never came home?
No, and then Paul and Dad had each other's numbers, and because obviously Dad used to go racing a bit with John, and Paul texted Dad actually when I got back and said, great to have Dan down. If he ever wants a job, there's always one for him. And I remember we were in the kitchen at home, and I said to Dad, well, text him back, said, what sort of job is this? And he says, well, we haven't got one for him, but we'll make one. So I rang him up and said, what are you thinking? And he said, well, we haven't got a pupil assistant, but we're getting to the numbers now where I can warrant having one of those. And I went down there and I just grafted. I just worked. Whatever needed doing, I did it. There was never a moment's... And I did that for 9.5 years. Once a month, I'd come in, slam the door, say to Grace, that's it, I've had enough. Ring up Dad, I'm coming back, put some fresh sheets on my bed. And he'd say, all right, yeah, fine. And he'd ring me the next morning, all right. Yeah, I'm busy on second lock, ring you later. But that's life, and it was in a competitive environment at Paul's, so you always... every day was intense, and every day was an opportunity to win more, do better. And sometimes Paul's frustrations boiled over. And on the way home in the car, sometimes we'd discuss all sorts, and sometimes I'd think, this is too much. I'd get an earful for nothing in particular because he needed to vent. But now I do it myself. I can see that everybody has a pressure valve. Everybody has a pressure valve. It's how they release it, who they release it to, and actually there's some. I'm still very good friends with Paul and hope I always will be. But I know for a certain period that I worked there, he knew, and for actually the whole time I was there, he knew he could vent at me, and I was 100% committed to him. Like there was no doubt that, I was going to turn the towel in and off I went. You know, I might get frustrated with it, but he knew that I was as committed to winning as he was. Although it wasn't my name on the door, I wanted to prove myself.
And prove yourself you did, and you were there at a golden time with some truly wonderful horses. I think you started just about the same week that Corto Star arrived.
Yeah, him and Denman walked into the yard, and you know, it was remarkable, really. They just, how they all came along at once. The masterminded, you know, Neptune Collonge, Twist Magic, and then there was, we went through a stage of, I remember it was, at the time it was Andy Stewart actually, who would buy these three-figure, like nowadays they're relatively cheap. He's buying these three-figure French horses, and we were just going out and winning that Grade 1 novice chase, that Grade 2 novice chase, that Grade 1 novice chase, and like it was just like the amount of horses that we had that sort of bubbled under the surface that in any other yard would have, you know, set the world alight. And that was what was great, actually, when we were there. Andy was always struggling for that festival winner, and then Celestial Halo come along, and then Big Bucks come along, and it was all right. And I remember Paul being particularly stressed about not being able to get Andy that first festival winner.
And you got there in the end, and he had an amazing collection of owners as well as horses. But one of his great skills over time has been managing quite big, larger-than-life, wealthy characters, and he's done it very effectively. He should never write the book, because he should never give away all the secrets, because it's probably his biggest asset. But like nobody, you know, I was well informed when I started this job, but there's always a lot of things you don't know. You know, Alex Ferguson said to Paul, "Teach him all he knows, not all you know," and I'm very aware that that is the case. And the way he handles the owners and the situations, and you know, he isn't afraid, and I've brought that from him and from my dad, to go, right, this is the line, this is where I've got to sit, and these are the reasons for me doing it, and everybody can see it. And I think his openness with the press and his owners and the situation sometimes landed him in hot water. You know, sometimes he's had to comment on things that he sometimes felt he shouldn't. We all have to do that, but he just has confidence that if it's not somebody's, you know, if he's upsetting somebody today, tomorrow it will be a different scenario. And that's life. You know, you can't win every time. You know, when Ruby was around, Ruby can only ride one horse in a race. And it's a very difficult job to manage, but somehow he did, and he still does. You had a great relationship with Ruby as well, didn't you, when he was riding for Paul?
Yeah, he was like, he just saw things very differently. Paul was the ultimate, and is the ultimate believer. Regardless of ability, regardless of anything, he just believed it was going to happen. Sometimes to the point where it was frustrating, because you knew in your heart that's not going to happen. But you know, what's the harm in being positive? But I think Ruby, being a great rider, he analysed things better probably than any other jockey. But one thing that all those great sportsmen and women, I think, have is this unbelievable belief. There's always got to be nerves. There's got to be nerves in whatever you do. Doesn't matter if you're playing your first match or you're playing your 1000th match as a footballer or whatever. There's got to be nerves before you start. But once the whistle goes, once the bell is rung, you know, once the tapes go back, I think the one thing I can cross parties with Ruby, AP, my dad, is that once they're in their own cocoon and they are then the masters of what's about to happen, they just believe it's going to happen somehow, and that's transmitted to the horse. I just call it being a believer. Like I say, you're just a believer, you know. And I said that to Ruby, and I say it to Dad. You know, I remember Dad went to the Olympics on Russell, a horse called Russell in Beijing, and he jumped the warm up, and the horse jumped well. He rang me up. He said, "You know what? He jumped well. It could be possible." I was like, you know, this would be like me winning this year's Gold Cup with All Mankind. It's just not going to happen. But he was there, and he has persuaded himself somehow he's going to make it happen. And you've got to love that. You have got to love that and appreciate that and buy into that, because you want your striker thinking he's going to go and score 3 goals today.
So how have you applied that? You know what the strengths and idiosyncrasies of people like Paul Nicholls and your dad Nick Skelton are. But how have you applied that to your own career? Because you can clearly see that from a slightly different perspective. You're not quite as... You are obviously very competitive, but you're not a believer like that, are you?
I am, definitely, and I try to transmit that all the time. But Gracie says to me a lot of the time, my wife, your passion can run into aggression, and I don't know I do that, and I sometimes have to check myself to make sure that this isn't becoming a rant, and this isn't something that's trying to juggle 1,000 balls. If I like to transmit to Harry, Bridget, my other riders, my owners, my staff at home, that we're going to win. We're going to win. We're going to win lots, and we're going to win some that we shouldn't win. That's the mark of being really good, I think, is winning when you shouldn't or when you can't or whatever. And I try to transmit that, but I do see Grace's point that I can bubble into aggression where it becomes the atmosphere becomes a little bit tense. Instead of it just being pure competition, it becomes a little bit, oh God, he's going on a bit.
So you say you were the punch bag for Paul, effectively?
Not all the time. No, I don't want to come across as like, oh, look at me, I helped.
Yeah, but where do you vent? Where's your valve?
I think I've got better at it now. But I don't express the negativity as much as probably I should. And there's a couple of times last year that I wasn't proud of. When I had a 100th win of the season, fastest 100 at Cheltenham, I made a terrible scene, and it was the day that one for Billy jumped the white tape, if you can remember.
Yeah.
And I was just infuriated because there's nothing I could... Like, there was a winner, and it's gone. It's been taken away from us at Cheltenham, and I'll never get it back. And it wasn't my fault. And I thought, I'm the master, I'm the chess player, I move the pieces, but I couldn't control that piece, and I lost my mind. And I lost my mind with Harry, I lost my mind with my dad, with my wife. We actually went off to a wedding that night in South Wales, which was the best thing for me because I went away, there was no phone signal, and I came back and I was like, right.
Did you all go in the same car?
Just me and Grace.
Okay.
And it was very frank, and the pressures of this job are constant, and they are they're sometimes frightening, and you have to be able to say, okay, it's all right, couldn't control today, but tomorrow's a different day. We couldn't control that scenario. We've learnt from that. So really, it's not about venting. I think when you get to the point where you're venting, you've got a problem. You need to let it out before you get to the point where literally the top comes off the bottle.
So is that what has surprised you most, even though you had 9 years in a high pressure environment at Ditch? Is it the responsibility for all those horses and, more importantly, all those people weighing on your shoulders?
Massively.
Is that what you've found difficult?
Yeah, easily the hardest thing. And I have no job security. Absolutely none. I have no job security whatsoever. I'm there at the mercy of so many different factors. If my owners or the owners don't want to send us horses, they're not contracted to. Even down to the fact that the BHA hold my licence, and we have a strict liability policy in our sport, where this counts for all trainers, by the way, not me, where you could be guilty of something that you're not, to one degree or another. And I don't want to bring that into it and create a furore there, but I'm just saying that's the way I see it. Do you know what I mean? It's so... You have to cross every T, dot every I, make sure everything is so right. It's a really hard process. on a day-to-day thing. And if you thought about it all the time, you go crackers. But the mental pressures of coping with a sporting business where you're dealing with owners, and then at the end of the day, we've got staff who've got family. You know, I'm not just supplying for my family. These people are relying on me, us, owners, results to pay them, for them to live, to pay their mortgage. You know, it's a when you strip it back, you know, there's a hell of a lot of responsibility there, which is intimidating, and you're not getting any help, external help. You're getting help from inside, and you know, people might say nepotism in our sport is rife, but I can only say that positively, because without them, I would be in big trouble.
And if you're going to talk about family relationships and giving opportunities to members of your family, I think a lot of people in the sport really admire what you and your brother have achieved together, and the loyalty that you've shown him, and presumably has been reciprocated from him to you as well. How hard a sell has that been to owners down the years?
Well, it's actually kind of backfired now, I feel, because Harry's so good that everybody's, will Harry ride? Well, we've got 140 horses in full training. The idea is for Harry to ride them, but there's days when there's 2 or 3 meetings and he can't, and that's hard to juggle. But at the start, I was like, Harry's riding them, and to my personal detriment, Harry was riding them, because I got a lot of owners who said, I'd like to send some horses, but I want X, Y, or Z to ride them. I said, no, that's not the rules. You know, it's our premises. You know, it's predominantly Dad's initial financial input. This is the way it's going to be, and we stood strong by that. We've relaxed that now for obvious reasons, but you know,
but only a little bit.
Oh yeah, only a little bit. But everybody believes in Bridget now as well. Yeah, I'm not going to bang on and say Bridget is underrated, because from my position, of course, I'm going to say that. But there's an awful lot of chat about Bryony and Lizzie and lady jockeys on the flats and everything else. Like, Bridget's got a big job. She's won at the Cheltenham Festival. She rides good horses every day. I think she slips under the radar a lot. And I'd like to also think that kind of demonstrates how we'll give everybody the best chance that we can. Mm-hmm. I've got one conditional jockey, Will Marshall, had a winner yesterday. I haven't got 3. I've got one amateur rider who went and rode Don Poli for Nick last week. We try and keep everybody happy, healthy, and have their job security in place, because if you know that you're going to ride them as a jockey, you're going to be confident. You don't have to prove your place every day. Every time you get your leg across one, you have to think, well, today I've got to prove myself, otherwise my job is in danger. If you're under that pressure, you ain't going to ride well.
You paint a very interesting picture of the pressures that trainers are under on a day-to-day basis, and you are one of the most successful operators in the country. Do you ever sit back and think, well, if it's like this for me, what's it like for the guy or girl trying to make life work with 25, 30 horses?
I say it all the time. I might come across as a sort of a bit of a brash, you know, gunslinger almost, but that isn't really me. You know, you have to put on a bit of a sandpapery suit on and stay a bit rough and a bit edgy to keep your edge. But I think about all of it. I think about how hard it would be if you weren't in that position. You know, and a lot of running a business is not just making the right calls; it's avoiding the wrong calls. And I try to look at examples of people who aren't quite doing so well and where it might have not gone right for them, or, you know, and sometimes I ask really inappropriate questions to people because I'm actually interested in how did you get to this point? And it might come across as offensive sometimes, but I only mean it in a human and positive light. And it is a hard job, and I couldn't imagine, you know, having to do it with a small number of horses that you were really worried, are these staff going to get paid at the end of the day? Must be horrendous.
I wish we could talk all morning. The good news is you are staying with us, so
Yes.
you've got plenty of opportunities to
As long
ask.
as those croissants are there, I'm in, Nick.
Also, I knew we'd find someone who'd eat them all in the end. I think we found our first suitable home for the croissants. You can ask all sorts of inappropriate questions to David Yates, to Robbie Downey, to George McGrath a little bit later on. For the moment, Dan Skelton, thank you very much indeed. Join me after this. We will be looking back on yesterday's racing. We'll also be talking about Protectorat, who Dan trains, who is now yet another winner to add to the tally after this. Subscribe to Racing TV to be notified when more Luck on Sunday videos are appearing online. And don't forget to join me for the show every Sunday morning from 9 o'clock with the best guests.